Good afternoon. Today is Thursday, March 19, 2009. My name is Alejandra Mendoza and I'm with Brenda Bernier to have an interview about treatment practices in photograph conservation. This interview is part of a series of interviews I'm conducting with photograph conservators as part of my research in the ARB program, in which I intend to describe and investigate into the current state of treatment practices in the field. I would like to follow a format for this interview in which I will begin asking you questions about your experience and your work, and then follow up by some questions about specific treatment topics to end up with some questions about training and the future of the field. So to begin with, I would like to ask you, could you please tell me your name, your job title, and affiliation?
I'm Brenda Bernier. I'm the Paul M. and Harriet L. Weissman Senior Photograph Conservator in the Weissman Preservation Center at Harvard University Library.
And when was this conservation lab established?
The lab is about 15 years old, but it's a special collections lab for Harvard University Libraries, which treats rare books, works on paper, and photographs. The photograph component is new, only since 2005. And I'm the head of that. We have another conservator, 2 technicians, and a photograph cataloger.
And Brenda, could you describe me the type of institutions that comprise your clientele, let's say in Harvard?
Right. Harvard has approximately 90 libraries, that's 90 libraries, and these libraries often have special collections, including photographs. There was a comprehensive Mellon-funded survey done in 2003 and identified 50 repositories that have photographs, although we're finding more every year, it seems. Those repositories can be dealing with fine arts, they can be dealing with science, they can be dealing with medicine, they can be dealing with law. It's all over the place. There are some museums, like the Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology. There's, of course, Harvard has fine art museums, the FOG being one of them, and all of those have very different kinds of photographs.
And do you serve those, all of these, you do conservation treatment for them? Or?
Correct. I have a university-wide mandate and I can serve all of them, although the fine art museums are served by their own conservator, so we collaborate sometimes, but primarily I focus on the libraries and the archives.
Thank you. Well, to get us started in the topic of treatment, as a first question, I would like to ask you, how do you define treatment?
Treatment, in my mind, is a physical intervention designed to stabilize the piece or improve its I'll call it legibility. I don't want to really get into aesthetics so much because with archival collections we're more concerned with the information in the image as opposed to some of the really fine surface qualities that you might look for in an art photograph.
And in your work, how do you determine the need for treatment? What factors?
First of all, the photographs are used by researchers, and so our mandate is to first make sure that the photographs are physically stable and can be handled. They're not rolled, they're not torn in half. Those very basic things. The second thing is the image legible? Can the information that needs to be extracted from that image be extracted from that image? And so is there a lot of surface dirt? Are there flaking areas? Is there a lot of silk mirroring? So those go into our priorities for what items need treatment.
And can you describe the scope of treatment that you perform, like in a general way, or what photographs you treat more frequently?
That's a harder question because the types of materials can range, from glass and daguerreotypes to silver gelatin prints and more modern prints. So I would say most of our work are on prints. A lot of gelatin silver prints and albumin prints. Most is in preparation for imaging. So in our lab, last year we treated over 2,200 individual photographs, and I would say over half of them were for some kind of imaging project. So a lot of them are batch treatments that come through really fast. We just had 600 curved and warped photographs that needed to be humidified and flattened, although we ended up using the dry mount press, but they needed to be flattened so they could be reintegrated into the collection. So we have a lot of treatments where we're doing the same treatment for dozens or hundreds of items. But we also do single item. We're preparing items right now for an exhibition, so that's very individual.
And in these individual photographs that you print for exhibition, it comes from the small treatments, and also could you tell me like more which treatments do you do? For this one, we had a 3-week turnaround time for the 20-something photographs that came into the lab. So our priority was surface cleaning, mending tears, a little bit of in-painting where there are tears and image loss, and silver mirroring reduction. Those were the primary goals. And now I would like to ask you about the degree of treatment or extent of treatment. And so I would like to know, how do you define what a minor treatment, a moderate treatment, or a major treatment is?
That's a good question. We don't have a list or a matrix, so, but I would say it's a combination of how much time is involved and how much risk to the photograph, particularly to the image. A minor treatment, I would say, has very low risk to the image. So it might have edge tears, it might have tape, but on the verso, it might have a little bit of surface dirt on the verso or something like that. A moderate treatment would have some risk to the surface. There might be a little bit of tape on the front of the photograph. There might be a tear that goes through the image area, something like that. A more major intervention would be anything that involves like an aqueous submersion of some kind, or like silver mirroring reduction, since that is so altering the image, that would count as a more major intervention. Anything that might involve taking it out from an album or something like that, that would be a major intervention, because now you're changing the display format of the piece. So that would be major.
And in this lab, you perform all of these degrees?
Correct. That's right.
Covers
everything.
Okay. And I would like to ask you, do you consider the creation and application of housings as conservation treatment?
In this lab, we don't. We consider it extremely important, so much so that we have 2 technicians that do a lot of housing, either individual custom-made housing, or they work on site, but working with really big collections, like 20,000 at a time, 95,000 at a time. But we don't call it treatment.
It's a preservation.
It's a preservation activity.
Thank you. Brenda, could you describe me the methodology you follow when treating a piece? Like what steps are involved in the process?
What kind of treatment in particular?
I mean, if something comes, for example, in this individual for exhibition, which steps would you follow when treating it? I mean, in general, as methodology.
In general,
If you have,
okay. In general, I would say as it comes in, we enter it and track it into a database system. We then examine it, write a condition report and a treatment proposal, and send that to the curator for authorization. We then document. At this point, we are documenting still with color slides, but we hope to make the transition to digital fairly soon. When without going into specifics about treatment protocol per se, we would then do the treatment. And who does the treatment depends on the level of availability and complexity and matching the skills with the piece. As I said, we have conservators and technicians, and the technicians do treatments, but we match that appropriately. And then after treatment, more documentation. Sometimes we'll do during treatment documentation if necessary. We'll write our treatment report and send it all back to the curator and log it out of the system.
And do you evaluate the treatment results in any way?
We have two ways to evaluate. The first is objectively, were the treatment steps followed that were proposed? Yes or no? And if not, why not? Where did it change and why? And then more subjectively, does it look right? Does it feel sturdy enough? But we don't have sort of a form or a matrix to evaluate treatment, but it is that combination of objectivity and subjectivity.
Thank you, Brenda. So now I would like to go into the topic of transformation. So I would like to ask you that in the work that has been done historically in the lab, or if you know before, do you know of any changes? Do you perceive any changes in the way treatments were approached or performed?
In this lab, because there haven't been photoconservators on staff for very long, I'm just going to make comments on my observations in general in the field. And I think nowadays there's slightly more humility when approaching treatments, because we've seen this continuity of care, and we know that anything we do it's not the final step of this process of this photograph. It's just one little blip, and it could have serious and irretrievable consequences. And it's not that people didn't realize that before. I'm sure they did, but I think now we are slightly more conscious of what we think is the absolute best cutting-edge thing now may not be looked upon so favorably in the future, and that can keep us humble.
And in this, do you perceive a level decrease or increase in the level of intervention? So
I think, on the whole, the field is becoming more conservative, less likely to do a lot of major interventions, and more likely to make sure that the piece is stable but not push it too far. And in the realm of archival conservation and what our archivists and curators and librarians expect, they expect a very conservative approach. So we are, somewhat constrained by that.
And Brenda, do you perceive a change in the perception of how a photograph should look? Has that changed?
Well, I'm going to speak only in terms of archival collections and not fine art collections. But I think definitely the curators are interested in maintaining this honesty of the photograph's age, and making it clear that it's lived a life, and it may have imperfections at this point, but that's part of it, and that's okay. I think as we become increasingly in this digital age where people are used to digital images, I think that at least in the archival community there's a strong appreciation of the photograph as a physical object, and they like that warts and all approach.
And in this sense, do you think that certain deteriorations are now, are accepted like as inherent to the photograph?
I think certain amount of fading or a slight amount of mirroring, it's all seen as patina, and it's all not as embarrassing, I guess, to the archivists.
Thank you. And now I would like to talk about the external work that doesn't is not related to Harvard. So,
Okay.
what would be your observation of in the work done in other private labs or in other institutions? How is it similar or different to the work that is being done here?
I think that the work done in regional centers is very similar to the work done at Harvard, in that you have often batches of material coming in addition to single item. There's a lot of emphasis on volume, but not to the extent that it would, that it compromises any treatment decisions, but it's just the different type of treatments that come through.
And Brenda, I'd like to ask you, do you consider that the use and context of the photographs define their treatment approach?
Here at Harvard anyway, because it's a university and the photographs were collected and produced with a certain function in mind, but sometimes 100 years later, 50 years later, that function is very different. So there are hundreds of examples of the use and context helping to appreciate the photograph, which is slightly different from what you asked, and I understand that. But in terms of the material and the use and context, you have to keep in mind if it was a lantern slide, it was meant to be projected. If it was a negative, it was meant to be printed. And your treatment protocols have to reflect that. I have one extremely good example of a treatment that I worked on where the use and context completely defined the treatment approach. When I was working at the Holocaust Museum, in the lab there were about 200 snapshots from this one collection of this young girl, surrounded by various family members. So these are World War II era snapshots. On the back of the snapshots, there was, each one of them had a strip of double stick tape with paper fibers all over it, so it had been attached to something. And then in the corners, there were 4 big blobs of adhesive that were causing distortions. And those areas of the adhesion, there were a lot of paper fibers, there was a lot of skinning, there were a lot of torn corners, a lot of missing corners. So a lot of damage from where it had been removed. My normal treatment approach would be, okay, we're going to remove the pressure-sensitive tape and reduce that adhesive so that it doesn't migrate through over time and destroy the image. And then we're going to reduce the adhesive in the corners, reduce those distortions, shore up those skinned areas, rebuild those corners, and everything will be perfect and stable. However, I then heard the history of these pieces, this collection. The woman in the photograph, who was a girl at the time, Lydia Sakaris, was a Jewish girl living with her parents in Nazi-occupied Europe. As the Nazi stranglehold began to take place in their area, the mother sent the girl, Lydia, into hiding, into a convent with some nuns. And she gave her a small locked suitcase and said, hide this, don't do anything with it until after the troubles are settled. The mother was then deported to a concentration camp and was killed very soon thereafter. The father was a doctor, and he was needed to work for the Nazis in a hospital. So he worked in a local hospital, had no contact with his daughter at all during the war. After the war, they were reunited. The father pried open the suitcase and found all these family photographs. And the mother had frantically torn them out of the albums before she was deported. So this changed the treatment protocol dramatically because the damage in the corner had meaning. It was the reason for these photographs to be, to explain that, this is what's left of the family. So at that point, the decision was easy to make to remove the pressure-sensitive tape because it was a post-World War II edition, and it would continue to degrade over time, but to leave those corner damage intact. And so context is everything.
Thank you for sharing this example. And I would like to ask you, do you consider, or does market influence in any way the treatment that you perform?
The market doesn't affect the performance per se, because we need to maintain the same level of skill, regardless of the value of the piece. But when we do have extremely valuable pieces that come through the lab, I will say that our level of documentation is increased tremendously.
Thank you. So now I would like to ask you about these specific treatment topics, and I will start with daguerreotype cleaning.
Yes.
And as you know, this is one of the earliest treatments performed in photographs and has changed through time in materials and methodologies. So I would like to hear your opinion about daguerreotype cleaning.
At this point, we are fairly conservative in our treatment of daguerreotypes. We generally, in terms of cleaning, we tend to use an air bulb, and sometimes we might use an aqueous solution, but that's the extent of it.
And do you have a record of other types of cleaning in the collection?
Other types have been done as repositories themselves directly dealt with private contractors, mostly conservators, but sometimes the earlier time it was not quite a conservator in the very early days. So you can see evidence of all kinds of treatment, electric cleaning, diarrhea, and cyanide cleaning, and all of that is evident in the collection.
Thank you. So my next question is about chemical intensification of photographs. So this has been an early conservation treatment and has also was performed in different types of photographs through time.
Right.
And as well, certain research was done about the possibility to apply it in photographs.
Right.
So I would like to hear your opinion about this treatment. Do you consider it's applicable, or should it or shouldn't it be performed?
In all my years as conservator, only one curator has ever asked if it was even a possibility. So it's not come up very often. And I think nowadays the archivists are more inclined to think if there's a digital solution to digitally enhancing an image. And I would tend to encourage them to think along those lines. That being said, if there are some collections whose sole value is the information and not the historic content of the photograph, and the only way to really get at this image is through some kind of chemical intensification, then it would be worth exploring.
And have you come up with any material here in Harvard that has been intensified in the past, or that would be?
I've not come across any, no of any.
And you currently don't perform?
No, we don't.
Thank you. Now my next topic is about unmounting and remounting photographs. And this also was a treatment that was performed more commonly in the past, and because it was considered, as to make the photograph more stable chemically, perhaps, and more physically. And also it has been done to allow individual display of photographs, in this case belonging to albums. So it's a very different approaches to these treatments. I would like to hear your opinion about it, and when do you think it's allowable or applicable?
A lot of the photographs in our collection that have come through the lab that are on mounts, the mounts are significant in some way. They have inscriptions that are significant, or the way the piece was constructed. So we would not very lightly unmount a photograph. I think we did have to do it once because the mount was so crumbling and unstable, and it was not a particularly valuable mount. It had no signatures on it, it had no inscriptions on it, it had no information on it at all. And that was the only time that I could see that justified. Especially if we're talking historic photos and they're not fine art pieces. The mount is not necessarily considered of historic interest. That being said, we do try to keep them together 99% of the time. We do have albums that come through, and we definitely try to keep those together, even when the pages are crumbling. We've had some albums come through that the pages are very weak and crumbling, and there's no more binding left. But in those cases, we've encapsulated the pages and put them together in a new post-binding to retain that album structure, so that the context can be maintained. But other times, I'm working on a print right now that was adhered to an album cover. But the album cover is the only thing that's left of the album. So there's really no information there that's relevant to the curator. So in that case, it's being removed from that. Thank you.
And my next topic is modern and contemporary photography. And as we see the tendency for bigger formats and for new materials, not only in the photographs but in the mounts, has started to challenge, or has been challenging the treatment field, the conservation field in terms of treatment. So I would like to hear your experience, if you have had any of these materials come.
That is fortunately not something that happens in archival collections very often. The most contemporary things we've had are some color chromogenic prints, like from Little Gorvidal collection or something like that. But and though they were blocked and somewhat challenging, nothing compared to some of the challenges that are being faced by our colleagues in the fine art museums.
And well, just to know your opinion in this subject, for example, when some images are severely damaged, there's this idea or possibility to reprint them. So I would just like to hear if you think that's what do you think about this situation?
I leave that to the fine art. I mean, in the archival realm, if it could be reprinted and the photograph itself did not have any intrinsic value, then that would be completely valid. But when the piece itself has intrinsic value but is damaged, then that's a much thornier question.
Okay. So now I would like to ask you about some questions about treatment training and experience. Okay. So I would like to know if you consider that treatment proficiency is central to the competencies of a photograph conservator.
If a person is going to call themselves a conservator, then yes, it is. Otherwise, they would be a project manager, a preservation officer, something like that. But for a person to be a conservator, they need to have treatment proficiency.
And how do you think we gain treatment proficiency?
How do we gain it? Practice. Learning from very good mentors for the most part.
And do you think we can evaluate treatment proficiency?
I suppose you could. I mean, it's easy to tell whether someone has good hand skills or not, and whether their treatments seem sensitive or not. So you could. I think it would be slightly more subjective than I would be comfortable in saying, but that's what it is. It's subjective. In that way, it becomes more of an art than a science.
And our last question is about the future challenges. So I would like to ask you, in terms of treatment, what do you consider are the major challenges that the field faces?
In the archival community, it is mold remediation on photographs and dealing with that, because whole collections can be wiped out so easily. So we need a good way to remediate mold damage. The other problem I see is that there's not quite enough treatment research going on. That there's so many unanswered questions. The more we learn, the more we know we have to learn. And there's just not enough. There's not enough of us to do it. And so one thing that's always bothered me is that when one person does some research, which is great, the rest of the field seems to be so grateful that someone has done it, that they don't question it maybe as thoroughly as they should. It takes a good deal of time for that questioning to be as thorough. So procedures get adopted that maybe shouldn't, or maybe should be adopted only in very certain circumstances. So we don't have that luxury of being able to question. We just don't have the time. Thank you.
Well, that's the end of our interview, so I deeply appreciate your time and your interest in performance improvement.
You're quite welcome.